The first time I noticed him, it was a warm September evening in a quiet little town outside of Columbus. I had just signed a 1-year lease on a small duplex on a sleepy street lined with old oak trees. It was exactly the kind of place I had been looking for: safe, affordable, and far enough from the main roads that nights were silent except for the distant chirping of crickets. My new neighbor lived on the other side of the duplex. His name, according to the worn metal plaque by his mailbox, was J. Harris. At first, I barely paid him any attention. I was busy unpacking, starting a new job, trying to get used to a new routine. The only thing I noticed initially was that he was always outside. Morning, evening, sometimes late at night, he'd be there, standing by his porch or near the edge of the shared driveway, just watching. He was tall, lean, maybe mid-40s, with pale skin and thinning dark hair. He always wore the same thing: a faded flannel shirt, jeans, and worn-out work boots. There was something about him that didn't fit the neighborhood. Everyone else waved, smiled, and made small talk. He never did. He just stared, hands in his pockets, expression unreadable. The first week, I tried to be polite. I'd nod or give a quick hey when we crossed paths. He'd either ignore it completely or give the smallest nod in return. I figured he was just a private guy. But then things started to feel off. It began with noises. Around 2 or 3 in the morning, I'd hear soft footsteps on the shared porch, then silence. Sometimes it was a faint scraping sound, like something being dragged. Other times it was a low murmur, almost like someone talking to themselves right outside my window. Whenever I'd work up the courage to peek through the blinds, no one was there. A few days later, I started finding things on my side of the porch: a rusty key, a small hand-carved wooden figurine, a dead moth pinned to an index card. No notes, no explanation, just sitting there, always when I wasn't home. I asked a couple of the neighbors down the street if they knew anything about Harris. The answers were vague. "Keeps to himself," one woman said. "Bit odd, but harmless." Another man just shook his head and muttered, "Don't bother him too much." I tried to shrug it off. People are quirky. Maybe the gifts were some weird way of being friendly. But the unease kept growing. One evening, after a long day at work, I pulled into the driveway and saw him standing at the dividing fence between our backyards. He was staring directly at my kitchen window, expressionless. As soon as he saw me, he slowly turned and walked back into his side of the duplex without a word. That night, I locked every door and window before bed. At around 1:30 a.m., I woke up to the sound of my back door handle jiggling. I froze, holding my breath. The noise stopped. I waited several minutes before creeping to the kitchen, a baseball bat in hand. Nothing. The handle was still locked, but when I looked down, I saw a single muddy boot print on the doormat, too large to be mine. I barely slept after that. The next day, I installed a cheap motion-activated camera by my back door. For a few nights, nothing happened. Then around 3 a.m., on the 5th night, my phone buzzed with an alert from the camera. When I checked the footage, my stomach turned to ice. It was Harris. He was standing at my back door, staring directly into the camera. He wasn't trying to hide. He wasn't even moving. He just stood there for nearly 5 minutes, face blank, eyes locked on the lens. Then he walked out of frame. I called the police. They sent a patrol car, but by the time the officers arrived, he was gone. They knocked on his door, no answer. They checked around the property, no sign of forced entry, nothing illegal. "Could just be a misunderstanding," one of them said. "Maybe he's confused." They filed a report but couldn't do much else. For a couple of weeks, things were quiet. No more gifts, no more noises at night. I started to relax. Maybe the police visit scared him off. But the quiet didn't last. One Saturday, I came home from running errands and found my front door slightly ajar. My heart raced as I stepped inside. Nothing looked stolen, but everything felt wrong. My couch cushions had been flipped over. My bathroom mirror was fogged up even though I hadn't showered. In the middle of my coffee table sat another wooden figurine, this one carved to look like a person sitting at a window. I moved it outside immediately, hands shaking. That night, I heard the low murmur again outside my bedroom window. This time I caught a word: watching. Then silence. I didn't sleep at all. The next day, I went to the property manager and demanded they do something. They told me they couldn't evict someone based on strange behavior without evidence of a crime. They suggested I move out if I felt unsafe. I started making plans to leave, but moving takes time. Every night became a test of endurance. I'd hear footsteps on the porch, see shadows flicker across my windows, and sometimes even catch the faint smell of cigarette smoke inside my own apartment, even though I don't smoke. The final night I spent there is burned into my memory. It was around midnight. The house was silent, except for the hum of the fridge. Then I heard a soft creak in the hallway, like someone stepping on the loose floorboard near my bathroom. I grabbed my phone and the baseball bat and crept out of my bedroom. There he was, Harris, standing at the end of my hallway, completely still, eyes fixed on me. He wasn't holding a weapon, but his presence alone was enough to paralyze me. "What are you doing in here?" I shouted, voice cracking. He didn't answer. He tilted his head slightly like a curious dog and then whispered, "You shouldn't be here." I bolted for the front door, fumbling with the lock, heart hammering. Behind me, I heard him moving, slow, deliberate footsteps on the hardwood floor. I managed to fling the door open and sprinted out into the street, barefoot, yelling for help. By the time the police arrived, he was gone. No sign of forced entry again. No sign of him at all. They searched his side of the duplex but found it completely empty, like he had packed up and vanished overnight. I moved out the next morning, left half my stuff behind. I didn't care. I just wanted out. It's been over a year now. I'm in another state, different job, different life. But sometimes late at night, I'll catch a glimpse of someone across the street, just standing there, hands in their pockets, watching. Always watching. Story, the end. The second time I moved into a small neighborhood, I promised myself I'd pay closer attention to who lived around me. My first rental experience had been unnerving, but this one seemed like a fresh start. The house was a one-story bungalow on a quiet street in Pennsylvania, lined with maple trees whose leaves burned red in the fall. It was perfect for my job at the nearby hospital and far enough from the city to be peaceful. My next-door neighbor introduced himself on the first day. His name was Richard, probably in his late 40s, heavy-set with salt and pepper hair, and he wore a faded flannel shirt. He had a wide smile, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. He extended his hand to shake mine, his grip lingering a little too long. "Good to see someone moving in. Been empty for a while," he said and went about unpacking. He stood on his porch for a while, watching. It wasn't threatening at first, just noticeable. Maybe he was curious about who I was, maybe lonely. The first week went smoothly enough. I'd leave for my 12-hour shifts at the hospital and come home to find my porch light on or my garbage can pulled neatly to the curb. I figured Richard was just being helpful, but little things started piling up. One evening, I returned from work to find a small bouquet of wildflowers on my porch with no note. Another night, a plate of cookies wrapped in plastic. I didn't touch them. Something about the gesture made me uneasy, too personal for someone I didn't know. Then the noises began. It was late, maybe after midnight when I first heard them. Soft, deliberate tapping at the kitchen window. Not the random noises of a house settling, but a pattern. Tap, pause, tap, tap, pause. I froze in my living room, holding my breath. I peered through the blinds, but the yard was empty. Over the next few nights, the noises escalated. Scratches along the siding, the faint creak of my back gate opening and closing. I installed a motion light by the kitchen window, thinking that would stop it, but the next morning, the light was unscrewed and dangling by its wires. One morning as I left for work, Richard waved from his porch. "You should be careful," he said casually. "Lots of weirdos out there at night." The way he said it made my stomach tighten. I started locking every window, every door, triple checking before bed. I put up small cameras facing the front and backyards. For a while, nothing happened. Then one night, I was reviewing the footage and my heart stopped. There, just at the edge of the camera's view, was a figure. Short cropped hair, a flannel shirt like Richard's, standing by my back door. The footage showed him reaching for the handle before the camera glitched and the feed went black for a full minute. When it came back, the yard was empty. I took the footage to the police. They wrote up a report but said unless I caught someone in the act or had clearer evidence, there wasn't much they could do. They advised me to be cautious and maybe talk to my neighbor. That night, I heard something at my bedroom window, a slow, dragging sound like a finger tracing the glass. Then a whisper, soft but clear, "I see you." I sat up, heart hammering. I grabbed my phone and called 911. By the time officers arrived, whoever it was had gone. They searched the yard and found nothing. I could see it in their eyes. They thought I was overreacting. The next morning, as I left for work, Richard was on his porch again, sipping coffee. He smiled. "Rough night?" he asked. I didn't answer. Things got worse after that. I started finding objects moved inside my house. My toothbrush on the kitchen counter. A drawer left open. My front door slightly ajar when I came home. Always subtle, always just enough to make me doubt myself. One day, I found a note slipped under my door in blocky handwriting. "Nice dreams." I couldn't breathe. I bought better locks, deadbolts, even nailed some windows shut. But the feeling of being watched never went away. The cameras caught more glimpses. A figure moving just out of frame, a reflection in the glass of my back door, always gone by the time I looked. Finally, one night after work, I came home to find my front door wide open. My stomach dropped. I called 911 before stepping inside. The officers arrived and swept the house. Nothing was missing. But on my bed was a single wildflower, identical to the ones from my porch weeks ago. I packed a bag and stayed at a friend's house for the night. While I was gone, the friend checked my cameras remotely. At 3:14 a.m., a man appeared on the porch, looking directly into the camera. The image was grainy but clear enough. Richard. He leaned in close, his eyes almost black in the infrared light, and whispered something. The audio picked up only 3 words. "I'm not done." I filed for a restraining order the next day. The police served it, but Richard denied everything. "She's crazy," he told them. "I'm just a neighbor trying to be nice." 2 days later, I moved out. I didn't even wait for the lease to end. I stayed in a motel for weeks, jumping at every sound, every shadow. But it didn't stop. I got silent phone calls at night, notes left on my car windshield. Once, I woke up to find a bouquet of wildflowers on my motel window ledge. Eventually, the calls stopped. The notes stopped. Months passed without incident. I tried to convince myself it was over. Then one night, walking to my car after a late shift, I caught a glimpse of a man in the parking lot. Flannel shirt, salt and pepper hair, watching me. When I turned to look again, he was gone. I don't know where he is now. I don't know if he's moved on or if he's just waiting. But I've never felt truly safe since. It's one thing to be attacked. It's another to be studied, to be invaded so quietly you question your own reality. Richard never raised a hand to me, never left a mark. But he took my peace, my sleep, my sense of safety. Even now, years later, every creak at night makes my heart race. I check every lock twice, sometimes 3 times. I don't open gifts from neighbors. I don't talk to strangers on porches. I know he's out there somewhere, and I know he's not done. Story the end. The first time I saw the man who would become my next-door neighbor, it was a muggy August evening in 2018. I had just moved into a small rental house on the outskirts of a quiet town in Indiana. The neighborhood was lined with modest 1-story homes, cracked sidewalks and mailboxes with peeling paint. The kind of area where everyone mows their own lawn on Sundays and waves when you drive by. It looked safe, normal, unremarkable. I was looking for peace after a messy breakup and a stressful job, and this seemed perfect. The house next door was different from the others. Its paint was faded, its blinds always closed, and the yard was overgrown with weeds. A rusty pickup truck sat in the driveway, unmoved, with a flat tire. The place gave me a strange feeling even before I met the man who lived there. I caught glimpses of him during my first week. Tall, gaunt, with sunken eyes and shaggy dark hair. He always wore the same gray hoodie, even in the heat, and smoked hand-rolled cigarettes on his porch. The first time our eyes met, he didn't nod or smile. He just stared at me, unmoving, like he was trying to figure out something about me. I told myself not to be paranoid. Maybe he was shy. Maybe he was lonely. But small things started to unsettle me almost immediately. On my second night, as I unpacked boxes in the living room, I heard what sounded like a camera shutter through the open window. I looked outside quickly, but the street was empty. The porch light on his house flickered off just as I glanced over. I shut the curtains and tried to ignore it. A week later, I started finding cigarette butts on my porch. At first, I assumed it was from someone walking by, but the butts were always in the same spot, right under my living room window. One morning, I stepped outside to get the mail and found a deep shoe print in the dirt by the window, facing inward. My stomach twisted. I tried not to jump to conclusions, but when I glanced over at the neighbor's yard, he was sitting on his porch staring at me with a half smile. He didn't look away even when I stared back. Things escalated from there. My phone started getting strange calls in the middle of the night. No one spoke on the other end, but I could hear faint breathing. Once, I heard what sounded like a low chuckle before the line went dead. When I tried to trace the number, it came up as unknown. I changed my number, but the calls started again within a few days. I couldn't prove it was him, but in my gut I knew. Then came the incident with my back door. One evening I returned from work to find it unlocked. I'm obsessive about locking doors, always have been. Nothing seemed missing, but the sense of violation was overwhelming. I called the police, who came out and checked the house. They said there were no signs of forced entry and told me it was probably an oversight on my part. But I knew I had locked it. From that night on, I started hearing noises in the walls, light, deliberate taps, almost like Morse code. Sometimes it was scratching, like nails dragging slowly across the drywall. It always came from the side of the house nearest his. Once, while sitting in my kitchen late at night, I heard faint whispering, indistinct words, but unmistakably human. I pressed my ear to the wall, and the sound stopped instantly. I bought security cameras and installed them around my property. But every morning when I checked the footage, the cameras would have cut out between 2 and 3 a.m., always at the same time, always for exactly 7 minutes. No glitches any other time of day. The company couldn't explain it. I started sleeping with the lights on, clutching a heavy flashlight like a weapon. One stormy night in October, I woke to the sound of my bedroom window creaking. The wind howled outside, rain lashed the house, but the creaking was rhythmic, deliberate. I sat up slowly, heart hammering, and saw the silhouette of a man through the thin curtain, someone standing outside, inches from the glass. He didn't move when the lightning flashed, and for a split second I saw his face. My neighbor, eyes wide, grinning, his hands pressed flat to the window pane. I screamed and grabbed my phone, but before I could dial, he was gone. I called 911 anyway, and a patrol car came, but the officer found nothing. No footprints in the mud, no one lurking around. He advised me to keep the blinds shut and call again if it happens. I could tell he thought I was overreacting. I started seeing him more during the day after that. He would be in his yard, trimming the weeds that had grown waist-high, but he never seemed to actually clear them. He just cut them in random places while glancing at my windows. Sometimes he'd be standing on his porch at 3 a.m., staring into my house when I got up to get water. Once, when I stepped outside in the morning, I found a note tucked under my doormat. It said, in shaky handwriting, "I watch you because I care." I went to the police again, but they said a note like that wasn't a crime. They suggested I get a restraining order, but admitted it would be hard to enforce without more concrete proof. Friends told me to move, but I couldn't break the lease without losing thousands of dollars. I felt trapped. The worst night came in December. It had snowed heavily and the street was quiet. Around 2 a.m., I woke to a faint sound, someone whispering my name. At first, I thought I was dreaming. Then I heard it again, louder, Sarah, my name. The voice was right outside my bedroom window. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. I reached for my phone on the nightstand, but it wasn't there. Panic surged through me as I realized I'd left it charging in the kitchen. The whispering grew more insistent. "Sarah, come outside." I crawled off the bed, staying low, and peered through the blinds just a fraction of an inch. He was there, my neighbor, standing barefoot in the snow, eyes wide, face pale, whispering my name. His hands were clenched, trembling. When our eyes met through the gap in the blinds, his expression changed. He smiled slowly and then raised a finger to his lips as if to say, "Shh." I backed away, heart racing, and ran to the kitchen to grab my phone. As I did, I heard the back door handle rattle. Then a slow, deliberate knock. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 more knocks. I called 911, whispering into the phone. The dispatcher told me to stay on the line and hide. I locked myself in the bathroom and waited, clutching a wrench I'd grabbed from under the sink. The knocking stopped. Silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. When the police arrived 15 minutes later, they found nothing. No footprints in the snow except mine. No one outside. They searched the yard and the neighbor's property but came up empty. The officer told me again to consider moving. I left the very next week. I broke my lease, forfeited my deposit, packed only what fit in my car, and drove to another state. For months, I slept with a light on, terrified of hearing that whisper again. I changed my phone number, my job, everything. But sometimes when I wake in the middle of the night, I swear I can feel eyes on me. Once, while getting gas hundreds of miles away from that house, I thought I saw a gray hoodie in the corner of my vision, but when I turned, no one was there. I don't know what he wanted. I don't know how he knew my name or how he got so close without leaving evidence. All I know is that he was patient, methodical, and he enjoyed my fear. He never had to break in or attack me outright. Just being there, watching, whispering, was enough to hollow me out. Some neighbors wave, some bring cookies, and some stand barefoot in the snow, calling your name in the dark. Story the end. In the spring of 2018, I moved into a modest duplex on the edge of a small Midwestern town. I had just gotten a job at a local accounting firm, and the place was cheap, quiet, and came with a little patch of yard. It was perfect for me and my cat, Milo. The other side of the duplex was occupied by an older man named Carl. He was in his late 50s, tall but stooped, with gray hair always tucked under a faded baseball cap. The landlord had told me he'd been there for years and kept to himself, which at first sounded like a blessing. For the first week, Carl barely acknowledged me. I'd see him sitting on his porch in the evenings, smoking and staring at the street with a blank expression. When I'd wave, he would nod without smiling, the same slow nod every time. It wasn't until I started hearing strange noises at night that I began to feel truly unsettled. At first, it was little things, soft thumps coming from his side of the duplex at odd hours, or the sound of faint tapping on the shared wall. Milo would perk his ears and stare at the wall for minutes at a time, tail puffed up. I brushed it off as normal creaks of an old building. But then I noticed my porch light kept flickering, even though the bulb was new. My trash cans were moved from the curb to the side of my house without me touching them. One night, around 2:30 a.m., I woke up to the sound of a door slowly opening. My heart pounded as I realized it wasn't my front door. It was the shared basement door. Our duplex had a basement that was divided down the middle by a flimsy plywood wall. Each unit had its own door to the basement stairs, but the wall didn't go all the way up to the ceiling. That meant technically someone from his side could crawl over into mine if they really wanted to. I grabbed a baseball bat and crept downstairs. The basement was dark except for the faint glow of a nightlight near the washer and dryer. Nothing looked disturbed, but there was a strange smell like damp earth and metal. I went back upstairs, locked the basement door, and shoved a chair under the knob. The next morning, when I left for work, Carl was outside, standing on the edge of his driveway. He smiled, his first smile since I'd met him, but it was thin, forced, almost rehearsed. "You sleep okay?" he asked. I froze, unsure how to answer. I just muttered, "Yeah," and went straight to my car. That week, more things began to happen. I'd find my mail slightly opened. My kitchen window, one I never used, was unlocked one evening when I came home. I installed a small security camera by the front door. The first few nights, nothing. But then one night at 3:14 a.m., my phone buzzed with a notification. Motion detected. I opened the app and saw Carl standing at my front door. He leaned close to the camera, eyes wide and unblinking, his lips moving as if he were whispering something. After a few seconds, he straightened and walked away. I saved the footage and called the police. They came by, but since Carl hadn't broken in or threatened me directly, there wasn't much they could do. "Keep your doors locked," they said. I started keeping every light on at night. A few nights later, I woke to the sound of Milo hissing. He was on the foot of my bed, staring at the bedroom door. I sat up and heard it too. Soft footsteps on the carpet just outside my room. My blood went cold. I reached for the bat under my bed and dialed 911 with my other hand. The footsteps stopped. When the police arrived, they searched the house and found no one. But the back door, which I had locked, was wide open. I showed them the footage from my camera again. This time, it showed Carl walking up to my porch at 3 a.m. and disappearing off screen. He never left by the front. The officers promised to patrol more frequently. I started sleeping with the bedroom door locked and a chair wedged under the knob, but I still couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. One morning, I went down to the basement to do laundry and found something that made my stomach lurch. A small gap in the plywood wall between the two halves of the basement had been widened. There were fresh scuff marks on the floor leading from his side to mine. That night, I set up a second camera at the basement door. At 2:57 a.m., it caught Carl opening his basement door on his side, climbing a small ladder, and peering over the wall into my basement. He stared into the darkness for almost a full minute before climbing back down. I printed the footage and marched to the police station. This time, they filed an official report and went to speak with him. They warned him to stay away from me. For a few days, things were quiet. Then came the final incident. I woke up around 1:30 a.m. to a soft creak, like someone stepping on a loose floorboard. Milo bolted under the bed. I grabbed my bat and crept to the bedroom door. I could hear slow, deliberate breathing on the other side. My heart slammed in my chest as I dialed 911, whispering to the operator. The breathing stopped, then slowly the doorknob turned. The chair under the knob held for a moment, then shifted. I screamed at the top of my lungs. Whoever it was retreated quickly. When the police arrived minutes later, they found Carl hiding in his own basement. He had a crowbar and a flashlight. He claimed he was checking on a noise he thought came from my side. The officers didn't buy it. He was arrested for attempted burglary. After that night, I moved out as soon as I could. The landlord changed the locks and reinforced the basement wall, but I never went back. Even now, years later, I still sleep with my doors locked, my windows sealed, and cameras at every entrance. It's not just about what Carl did. It's about realizing how thin the barrier is between you and someone who's decided to watch you, learn your habits, and wait. A neighbor can become a shadow inside your own home before you even realize it. Story the end. I moved into a small rental house on the outskirts of a mid-sized town in Pennsylvania at the beginning of last spring. It was a quiet, tree-lined street with mostly older couples and families who had been there for decades. The rent was affordable, and the house was a little worn but charming, with creaky hardwood floors and a screened-in porch. I wanted a fresh start after a bad breakup and thought a quiet neighborhood would give me the peace I needed. The house next door was an old 2-story home painted a dull blue, its shutters peeling, its front yard cluttered with lawn ornaments and broken wind chimes. I rarely saw anyone go in or out. About a week after moving in, I finally met the occupant, a man named Douglas. He was probably in his early 60s, with thinning gray hair, an uneven smile, and an odd way of pausing too long before answering questions. He said he'd lived there his whole life, that his parents had passed away and left him the house. At first, Douglas seemed harmless, even a little shy. He made small talk when I was out checking the mail, asked about my job, where I was from. He stared too much, though, holding eye contact a few seconds longer than was comfortable, and his questions were oddly specific. Do you live alone? What time do you usually get home? Do you keep your doors locked? I'd brush them off with vague answers, but I started to feel uneasy about his curiosity. The first real red flag happened about 2 weeks in. I had just gotten home from work late one night, around 11:30 p.m., and noticed something on my porch. A small paper bag with no note. Inside were 3 apples and a can of soup. I thought maybe it was some kind of neighborly gesture, but when I asked around the next day, no one else had received anything like it. Douglas, however, stood on his porch while I checked the bag, staring at me with that strange half-smile. Over the next few weeks, little things started happening. My trash cans, which I left by the side of the house, were moved closer to my back door overnight. My curtains would be slightly parted when I knew I had left them closed. Once I came home to find my back gate unlatched. Nothing was ever stolen or broken, but I felt like someone was testing boundaries. One night in late May, I woke to the sound of footsteps outside my bedroom window. I froze, heart hammering, and reached for my phone. The sound was faint but deliberate, circling slowly around the side of the house. I dialed 911, whispering to the dispatcher. When the police arrived, they found no one. Douglas's lights were off next door. But when I stepped out the next morning, there were footprints in the damp soil by my window. Men's footprints, large, leading toward Douglas's yard and stopping just before his back steps. I started locking every door and window religiously, even during the day. I installed a small motion light near the back door. For a while, things calmed down. Then in mid-June, I found a note under my doormat. It read in uneven handwriting, "You looked scared last night. Don't worry, I'll keep you safe." I took the note straight to the police, but without hard proof, they couldn't do much. They suggested I install cameras, but I didn't have the money at the time. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the old house felt like footsteps. Douglas began appearing more often, always at odd times. Early in the morning when I left for work, he'd be outside watering plants. Late at night when I came home, he'd be on his porch, smoking and watching. Once, when I got out of my car, he said softly, "You shouldn't park so far from the porch. It's dark out there." I mumbled something and hurried inside. In early July, things escalated. I came home from the grocery store to find my back door slightly open. I was sure I had locked it. Inside, everything looked untouched except for a single object on my kitchen counter, a Polaroid photo of me unloading my car from a few days earlier. The angle was from across the street, as if someone had been hiding in the bushes. That night, I slept in the living room with the lights on, a heavy flashlight clutched in my hand. I called my brother the next morning and told him everything. He offered to come stay with me for a while, but he lived several states away. I tried to put on a brave face, telling myself I was imagining things, but deep down I knew someone was watching me. By late summer, I started hearing faint knocking on my walls at night. It would start around 2 or 3 a.m., soft and irregular, like fingertips drumming. I'd get up, walk through the house, but find nothing. Once, I opened my front door and found a dead bird on the welcome mat. Another time, my spare key, which I'd hidden under a brick by the porch, was gone. The final straw came on a muggy night in August. I was in bed, drifting off, when I heard my back door creak. I froze. Then, unmistakably, slow footsteps in my kitchen. I grabbed my phone, heart pounding, and dialed 911, whispering that someone was inside. The dispatcher told me to stay on the line and hide. I slipped into my closet, crouching behind hanging clothes. The footsteps grew closer, moving from the kitchen to the hallway. My breathing felt loud, uncontrollable. Through the slats of the closet door, I saw a shadow move past my bedroom, then silence. The police arrived within minutes, sirens cutting through the humid night. I heard them shouting, the thud of boots. When they opened the closet door, I nearly collapsed. They found no one in the house, but the back door was wide open and the screen cut. The next morning, I packed a bag and left. I stayed at a motel for 2 weeks while I arranged to break my lease. When I returned to collect the last of my things, the house felt different, violated. As I was locking up for the final time, I saw Douglas standing on his porch, smiling faintly. He lifted his hand in a small wave and said, "It's a shame you're leaving. We were just getting to know each other." I drove away without looking back. Later, I learned from the landlord that I wasn't the first tenant to leave abruptly. A young couple had moved out the year before, citing personal reasons. An older woman before them had broken her lease early, saying she felt unsafe. No one had ever pressed charges. Even now, months later, I still have nightmares about that house, about the soft knocking on the walls, the feeling of being watched, the slow creak of the back door opening in the night. Sometimes, when I'm alone in my new apartment, I'll catch myself glancing at the window, half expecting to see Douglas standing there in the dark, smiling. Story the end. The first time I noticed something wrong was the night I moved into the duplex on Rosewood Avenue. It was a quiet neighborhood in upstate New York, the kind of place where kids played hopscotch in the driveways and older couples watered their lawns at dusk. The rent was cheap, the unit was freshly painted, and after my divorce, I needed somewhere to start over. At first glance, the street felt safe. But the longer I stayed, the more I realized there was something deeply off about the man living in the other half of the house. His name was Doug. He was maybe mid-40s, tall, wiry, with a head of dark hair, streaked gray at the temples. When we met the day I moved in, he gave me a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes and said, "Welcome to the neighborhood. It's quiet here. You'll like it." His voice had a strange rhythm to it, like he'd memorized the line but wasn't sure how to deliver it naturally. He offered no handshake, just stood with his hands shoved deep into his pockets, eyes darting around as though checking for someone. The first week, nothing seemed unusual. He kept mostly to himself, except for the occasional knock on our shared wall late at night. Soft, irregular thuds I assumed were from him hanging things or moving furniture. But the knocks never happened during the day. Only after midnight, and always followed by silence. One Friday night around 1:30 a.m., I was in bed reading when I heard a faint scraping sound outside my bedroom window. It was subtle at first, like a branch brushing against glass, but the more I listened, the clearer it became. Someone was dragging something metallic slowly across the siding. I sat up, heart pounding, and crept to the window. I didn't see anyone, just the empty driveway bathed in the pale glow of the streetlight. I told myself it was an animal, maybe a raccoon. I went back to bed and tried to sleep. The next morning, I noticed footprints in the damp soil under my window. Men's boots. The prints were deep, fresh, and angled toward the house as if someone had been standing there for a while. When I knocked on Doug's door later to ask if he'd seen anything suspicious, no one answered. But as I turned to leave, I noticed the curtains shift slightly, just enough for me to know he was watching. After that, the oddities increased. I'd come home from work to find my doormat flipped upside down or my mailbox door left open. Once, my spare car key, which I kept hidden under a brick near the porch, was gone. The next day, it was back, placed neatly in the same spot, but turned in the opposite direction. It felt like someone was testing boundaries, letting me know they could come closer whenever they wanted. About a month after I moved in, I began hearing noises in the walls. Not mice or pipes, footsteps. Slow, deliberate, as if someone was pacing between the studs. I'd knock back and the sound would stop. I told myself it was the house settling, but my gut knew better. Doug's behavior became more unnerving too. He started standing outside at odd hours, staring at my windows. He'd be there when I left for work, leaning against his fence, eyes following me. He never waved or spoke, just watched. One night, while taking out the trash, I caught him crouched by the shared basement door. When I asked what he was doing, he jumped, then muttered something about checking the pipes before scurrying inside. Then came the gifts. Small, bizarre items left on my doorstep. A single leather glove, a cracked wristwatch, a child's toy soldier, missing an arm. No notes. Just objects that didn't belong to me. I called the police after the third time. They sent an officer who walked around, took a report, and said, "Could be a prank. Keep your doors locked." But I could tell from his tone he didn't believe anything was actually happening. One night in late October, during a heavy rainstorm, I woke to the sound of my front door unlocking. I had installed a deadbolt, but the sound was unmistakable, metal sliding against metal. My stomach dropped. I grabbed my phone, dialed 911, and whispered to the operator what was happening. From the top of the stairs, I saw my front door slowly open. A man stepped inside, completely drenched. In the dim light, I recognized him instantly. Doug. He was holding something in his hand, though I couldn't tell what. I backed away slowly, clutching the phone, whispering frantically for the police to hurry. Doug didn't speak. He just stood there, dripping water onto the floor, staring up at me. Then, as if he'd heard sirens in the distance, he turned and walked out, closing the door softly behind him. The police arrived minutes later, but by then, Doug was gone. They searched his half of the duplex, but found nothing suspicious. He denied everything, claiming he'd been asleep all night. Without proof, they couldn't do anything. I installed security cameras the next day. For a week, nothing happened. Then, one morning, I woke to find a single photo taped to my bathroom mirror. It was of me, asleep in my bed. The angle was from the foot of the mattress. The timestamp in the corner showed it was taken 2 nights prior. My heart stopped. I had no idea how he'd gotten in or out without tripping the alarms or appearing on the cameras. I left that day, packed what I could into my car, and drove to a hotel 2 towns over. While I was gone, my landlord called to say my unit had been broken into. Nothing was stolen, at least nothing obvious. Just the feeling of safety I'd been clinging to. I moved out permanently a week later. New apartment, new locks, new everything. For months, things were quiet. I started to sleep again to believe the nightmare was over. Until one morning, I opened my mailbox at the new place and found a single item inside. The same cracked wristwatch that had been left on my old doorstep. No note. No explanation. Just the watch, ticking faintly, like a reminder that he still knew where I was. Story the end. A few years ago, I rented a small duplex on the outskirts of a quiet town in Pennsylvania. It was the kind of place people imagined when they thought of peaceful American neighborhoods. Neatly mowed lawns, mailboxes at the curb, the occasional pickup truck parked in the driveway. I'd moved there after a breakup, looking for some quiet and a fresh start. My unit shared a wall with another, and an older man lived next door. His name was Carl, but everyone on the street just called him Mr. H because his last name was long and difficult to pronounce. He was probably in his mid-60s, retired, with thin white hair and a stoop that made him look shorter than he was. He always wore flannel shirts, even in the summer, and heavy work boots. The first few weeks were uneventful. He'd wave if he saw me, and occasionally we'd exchange a few polite words about the weather or trash pickup schedules. But even in those early days, I felt something off about him. His eyes lingered a little too long when we talked, and his smile never seemed to match what he was saying. I didn't think much of it until the noises started. About 2 weeks after moving in, I began to hear faint scraping sounds at night, coming from the shared wall between our units. It wasn't constant, just irregular scratching or dragging noises, like someone moving furniture or dragging something heavy across the floor. I'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, telling myself it was nothing. Maybe he was rearranging his place or had a pet. But then it escalated. Around midnight, when everything was quiet, I'd hear soft tapping at my back window. It was a ground-level window that faced a narrow strip of grass separating my unit from a chain-link fence. I'd sit up in bed, heart pounding, and listen. Tap, tap, tap. Every time I turned on the light and looked, no one was there. I installed heavier curtains and kept them closed at all hours, but the tapping continued. One afternoon, as I was bringing groceries in, I noticed something odd about the patch of dirt just under that window. A clear shoe print, large, maybe size 11 or 12, pressed into the soil. It was fresh. I crouched down to look closer, and my stomach tightened. I couldn't tell if it had been there overnight or if someone had been standing there while I was inside. That evening, I heard Carl humming through the wall. It wasn't a tune I recognized, just a low, repetitive hum. It sent shivers through me. The first time I saw him standing in my yard, it was around 9 p.m. I'd been in the kitchen washing dishes when movement outside caught my eye. I peeked through the blinds, and there he was, standing in the strip of grass between our units, staring straight at my window. His hands were in his pockets, his face blank. I ducked down instinctively, my heart hammering, then forced myself to peek again. He was gone. I told myself maybe I was imagining things. Maybe he had just been passing through. But then things inside my home started to feel off. A coffee mug I always kept on the counter was moved to the sink. My bathroom door would be ajar when I knew I had closed it. Once, I came home to find my back door unlocked. Nothing was missing, but the feeling of violation was unbearable. I called my sister and told her what was happening. "Maybe it's the breakup stress," she said gently. "You're living alone now. That can mess with your head." I wanted to believe her, but deep down, I knew this was real. I started locking every door and window religiously, even during the day. I bought a motion sensor light for the backyard and installed a cheap security camera from a big box store. That night, the light flicked on around 2 a.m. I watched from my bedroom window as a shadow moved across the yard, just outside the range of the camera. The next morning, there was something under my window, a dead bird. Its neck twisted at an unnatural angle. I took a photo and sent it to my sister. She urged me to call the police. I did, but when they came, they found nothing. They spoke to Carl briefly, but he smiled politely and denied everything. "I keep to myself," I heard him tell the officers. "Must be some kids." For a few nights, things went quiet. No tapping, no movement, no dead animals. I started to think maybe it was over. Then one night, as I lay in bed scrolling through my phone, I heard a soft creak, floorboards, inside my unit. Not the wall, not outside, inside. My blood went cold. I sat up, holding my breath. Another creak, closer this time. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, whispering into the receiver. The dispatcher told me to stay on the line and stay quiet. I crept toward my bedroom door, heart in my throat. The creaking stopped. I peeked into the hallway. Nothing. Then, from the kitchen, a low humming sound. That same tune I'd heard through the wall. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone. Suddenly, the back door slammed. By the time the police arrived, he was gone. They searched the property but found nothing. My security camera had been unplugged. I didn't sleep at all that night. I sat on the couch, lights on, a kitchen knife in my hand, waiting for dawn. The next day, a note appeared under my doormat. Just 3 words written in blocky letters. Still watching you. I didn't wait for another incident. I packed my car with essentials and drove to my sister's place 3 hours away. I never went back to that duplex except to move the rest of my belongings out with 2 friends. Carl was outside when we loaded the truck. He just stood there, hands in pockets, watching. He smiled as we pulled away. It's been 4 years since then. I live in another state now, in an apartment building with cameras in every hallway. But I still wake up at night sometimes, convinced I hear that same low humming through the walls. Sometimes I even check under my doormat before going to bed. I haven't seen Carl again, but I'm not sure that matters. The feeling of being watched never really leaves you. Story the end. I moved into a small 2-story duplex on the outskirts of a quiet Midwestern town last spring. The rent was cheap, the neighborhood looked normal enough, and after years of sharing cramped apartments with roommates, I was excited to finally have a place to myself. The landlord, an older man with nicotine-stained fingers and a habit of sniffing between sentences, told me the other half of the duplex was occupied by a middle-aged woman named Marlene. "Keeps to herself," he said, "quiet as a mouse. You'll hardly know she's there." The first few weeks were uneventful. I worked from home as a copy editor, so my days were mostly spent at my desk in the spare bedroom, overlooking the narrow driveway that separated our 2 units. Sometimes I'd see Marlene through her kitchen window, smoking while she rinsed dishes or staring at the trees behind our property. She never waved. I assumed she was shy. It wasn't until the 3rd week that I started to notice odd things. At first, it was the sound of footsteps at night, light and deliberate, moving back and forth along the shared wall between our units. They'd start around 1 a.m. and stop abruptly around 3. I tried to tell myself she was just a night owl. Then the mail started to get mixed up. I'd find envelopes addressed to me inside my mailbox that had clearly been opened and resealed. Once, I caught her standing at the edge of our driveway holding a small stack of envelopes. When she noticed me watching, she smiled, a wide, slow smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, and handed me my mail without saying a word. The envelopes smelled faintly of cigarette smoke and something metallic, like old coins. By early summer, the small noises had turned into full-on disturbances. I'd be lying in bed reading when I'd hear her voice through the wall. Not talking, not singing, just whispering. It was too faint to make out words, but the cadence was hypnotic, like a chant. I pressed my ear to the wall once and heard my own name, clear as day, drawn out like a breath. Aaron! I tried to be rational. Thin walls, bad acoustics. Maybe she was on the phone with someone who had my name. But the next morning I found a note slipped under my door. It was handwritten in cramped block letters. "I like when you listen." I didn't know what to do. I hadn't even spoken to her yet, and now she was acknowledging me in ways that made my stomach knot. I taped the note to my fridge as a reminder not to let this slide, but every time I walked to her door to confront her, I froze. One Saturday afternoon, I was cleaning out my backyard when I noticed something odd. The duplex had a shared chain-link fence at the back, separating our property from a strip of woods. Buried under the grass, on my side of the fence, was a small mason jar filled with cloudy water and what looked like hair, human hair. Inside was a slip of paper with my name written on it. The handwriting matched the note. I called my landlord. He brushed it off. "Marlene's harmless," he said. "She's been there for years. Some people are just different." The next week, I started locking all my windows and doors, even during the day. The sense of being watched was constant, like a weight pressing against my shoulders. I'd catch movement from her kitchen window when I walked outside, just the flick of a curtain or a glimpse of her face retreating from the glass. One night, I left my office window cracked open and woke to find it fully open, the latch unhooked. Nothing was missing, but my desk chair had been turned to face the window. I bought a small security camera and placed it in the corner of my living room, pointed at my back door. The first 2 nights, nothing happened. On the third night, I woke to a notification on my phone. Motion detected at 2:17 a.m. I opened the live feed. Marlene was in my kitchen. She was barefoot, wearing a long nightgown, her hair hanging over her face. She stood perfectly still for several seconds, her head cocked like she was listening. Then, slowly, she moved to my refrigerator, opened it, and took out a single apple. She held it up to her nose, sniffed it, and put it back. Then she turned toward the camera, looked directly into it, and smiled. I called 911, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. By the time the police arrived, she was gone. They searched both units but found no signs of forced entry. Her door was locked. Her lights were off. She didn't answer when they knocked. The next morning, a fresh note was under my door. You shouldn't watch while I visit. I barely slept for the next week. I installed more cameras, changed the locks, even nailed shut the window she'd opened. I avoided being home at night whenever possible, but the notes kept coming. You left your coffee on the counter. Your shirt looked nice today. The woods are quiet tonight. One night in late July, I woke up to the sound of my front door creaking open. My bedroom door was shut and locked, but I could hear someone moving around in my living room, slow, deliberate footsteps. I called 911 again, whispering into the phone, my heart hammering. The operator told me to stay calm and stay on the line until officers arrived. I heard the footsteps stop. Then, from the other side of my bedroom door, her voice, soft, low, almost affectionate. Why do you keep calling them? I held the phone so tight it creaked in my hand. The doorknob rattled once, then stopped. The apartment went silent except for my own ragged breathing. When the police arrived, the door was ajar again, and she was gone. They searched her unit that time. What they found made one of the officers gag. In the basement of her duplex, half were dozens of mason jars like the one I'd found, each labeled with names. Some were filled with water and hair, others with teeth, bits of fabric, and small, unidentifiable objects. One jar had my name on it. They arrested her that night. The police never told me exactly what she'd done or what the jars were for. The local paper ran a vague story about disturbing findings and mental health concerns. She was taken away quietly. I moved out 2 weeks later. I thought that would be the end of it. But last month, at my new apartment across the state, I found a mason jar on my windowsill when I came home from work. This one was empty except for a slip of paper. It said, "You can't lock me out." Story the end. The move to Maplewood Drive was supposed to be a fresh start. After a messy breakup and the stress of my last job, I wanted nothing more than a quiet street, a small house, and the peace of anonymity. Maplewood was exactly that, on the surface. Rows of similar single-story homes, kids playing basketball in driveways, old oak trees casting shade over the sidewalks. It was the kind of place where people waved at you just because you were there. I signed the lease on a little 2-bedroom bungalow, thinking it would be the reset button I needed. I first noticed the man 2 doors down on my second night. I was unpacking boxes late, music low, when I heard footsteps outside on my porch. My heart jumped. I went to the window and peered out just in time to see someone tall and thin stepping off my porch and heading down the sidewalk. A neighbor, I thought, maybe just curious about the new person on the block. But he didn't knock, didn't say a word, just turned his head once and stared at me through the window as he walked away. I waved awkwardly. He didn't wave back. Over the next few days, his presence became a pattern. I'd catch him sitting in a lawn chair at the edge of his driveway, no phone, no book, no drink, just sitting and staring. Sometimes at nothing, sometimes directly at me. He was maybe in his late 40s, pale, always wearing a dark windbreaker regardless of the weather. His house looked as bland and unassuming as the rest. But him, there was something off. I tried to be polite. One afternoon, as I was dragging my trash can to the curb, I said, "Hey, how's it going?" across the yard. He just tilted his head slightly, like a bird considering whether to attack or fly away, then turned back toward his own house. No words. The air around him felt heavy. I tried to shrug it off. Maybe he was just socially awkward. Then the small intrusions began. My front porch light unscrewed. My garden hose uncoiled. One morning, I found the lock on my back gate hanging open, though I was sure I'd latched it. Nothing stolen, nothing broken. Just touched, like someone wanted me to know they could. I started double-checking every lock before bed, closing curtains tightly, leaving a lamp on in the living room overnight. One night around 11 p.m., I was washing dishes when my phone buzzed with an alert from the motion sensor I'd set up over the front door. I pulled up the app, and there he was, standing at the edge of my porch, looking up at the camera, not moving, just staring. My heart hammered. I grabbed my phone and called 911. By the time the police arrived 50 minutes later, he was gone. They walked the street, knocked on his door, but nobody answered. "We'll make a note," they said, "but unless he does something, our hands are tied." I tried to confront him the next day. He was back in his lawn chair, staring. I walked across the grass, heart pounding, rehearsing words in my head. "Can you stop hanging around my house?" I asked. My voice shook more than I wanted. He didn't blink, didn't move, just smiled, a small, dry twist of his lips, and said, "I like to know who I'm living near." Then he stood and went inside, door closing with a final thud. It was like talking to a mannequin. That night, I woke to the sound of my back door rattling. Soft at first, then more deliberate. I froze, clutching my phone. The door handle turned once, twice, then stopped. Silence. I lay there for what felt like hours before I dared to look. Nothing. The door was locked. But when I checked the security footage the next morning, the camera had gone black at 2:13 a.m., right when I'd heard the noise. When it came back on at 2:27, the door was slightly ajar. I called the police again. They came, took my statement, walked the perimeter. No signs of forced entry, one of them said. "Maybe your lock's faulty." But my gut told me different. My gut told me he'd been inside. Over the next week, the intrusions escalated. I'd wake up and find small objects moved. A coffee mug on the wrong counter, a shoe by the front door I hadn't worn in days. Once I found my bedroom window open an inch, the screen pushed in from the outside. Every time I called the police, the same answer. No evidence. No crime. They started to sound skeptical, like maybe I was making it up. I stopped sleeping. Every creak of the house set my nerves on fire. I started keeping a hammer by my bed. The man 2 doors down was always there, always watching. In the mornings, I'd see him at his window, peeking from behind the curtain. In the evenings, he'd be back in his lawn chair, hands folded, hair, eyes fixed on me. It felt like being under a microscope. Then came the night I won't forget. I'd stayed up late working on my laptop in the living room. Around 1:30 a.m., the power went out. My laptop screen flickered off, plunging the room into darkness. My stomach clenched. I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and crept toward the fuse box. That's when I heard it. Footsteps in the hallway. Slow, measured, coming closer. "Who's there?" My voice cracked. The footsteps stopped. I held my breath, listening. The house was silent except for my own heartbeat. Then from the kitchen a whisper, "I've been waiting for you to notice me." I bolted for the front door, but when I reached it, the deadbolt wouldn't turn. It was like someone was holding it from the other side. Panic surged. I spun, scanning the dark, and for a split second saw him, my neighbor, standing at the end of the hallway, his face pale and slack, his eyes gleaming in the faint light of my phone. I swung the hammer wildly, shouting, and stumbled backward toward the back door. This one opened, and I ran barefoot into the yard, across the damp grass, straight to my car. I didn't look back until I was on the street, engine roaring. His house was dark. My house was dark. Nothing moved. I spent the rest of the night in the Walmart parking lot, watching my own house through the Ring camera on my phone. At 3:12 a.m., the feed flickered. When it came back, the camera showed my front porch, empty except for a scrap of paper taped to the door. In blocky handwriting, "You can't lock me out." I didn't go home for 2 days. When I finally did, accompanied by a police officer, the paper was gone. Nothing inside was disturbed. It was like it had never happened. But the feeling remained, that heaviness, that watchfulness. I've since installed an alarm system, cameras in every room, stronger locks. I've filed restraining orders, but they go nowhere. He's careful, too careful. In the daylight, he's invisible. At night, I feel him moving just out of sight. Sometimes I hear my name whispered from the yard. Sometimes I wake and find my closet door cracked open, a faint smell of damp earth lingering. I don't know why he picked me. I don't know what he wants. All I know is he won't stop. Not with laws, not with locks, not with cameras. People tell me to move, but I can't shake the feeling he'd just follow. He's patient, patient enough to wait for me to wear down. Every night now, before I go to bed, I sit in the living room with the lights on, hammer on my lap, cameras streaming to my phone, and every night through the window I see the faint outline of a man 2 doors down, still as stone, eyes fixed on my house, waiting. Story, the end. It was early autumn when I moved into a quiet neighborhood in northern Indiana, a sleepy street lined with maple trees that had just started to turn orange. The rent on my new place was cheap, almost suspiciously so, but it was a full single-family house. No upstairs neighbors, no cramped hallways. It felt like a dream compared to the apartment I'd left behind. I was 25, new to town, working a night shift at a nearby hospital, and the idea of living alone seemed like a chance to breathe. The house was old, built sometime in the 1950s. It had creaky floors, narrow hallways, and a big front window that overlooked the street. Across from me was another older house with peeling white paint and an overgrown yard. I noticed it right away, not because of the house itself, but because of the man who seemed to always be outside of it. He was in his 40s, maybe early 50s, with greasy black hair that hung over his face and an expression that hovered somewhere between blank and intent. He'd stand on his porch, hands resting on the railing, staring at nothing in particular, but always facing my direction. The first time I waved, trying to be neighborly, he didn't wave back. He didn't even blink. He just stared. At first I told myself it was harmless. Maybe he was lonely. Maybe he was just weird. But after my third night coming home from work at 3 a.m. and seeing him still there, still staring, something inside me started to feel off. Things got stranger quickly. The first week I moved in, I noticed little disturbances. My garbage cans were pulled out to the curb on days that weren't collection days. My mailbox door would be left hanging open. My back gate, always locked, would sometimes be unlatched in the morning. At first, I chalked it up to the wind, or maybe kids, but then I started noticing him more and more. He wasn't just on the porch anymore. I'd see him walking slowly down the sidewalk at odd hours, passing my house without looking at it, but I could feel his eyes on me from under his hair. One night, I got home from work later than usual. It was almost 4 a.m. The street was empty, except for his silhouette on the porch. I parked in my driveway, hurried up to my door, and tried not to look. But out of the corner of my eye, I saw him take a step down from his porch, slowly, like he was testing the air. My heart raced. I locked the door behind me as fast as I could. Then came the phone calls. It started with one call a night. The phone would ring at exactly 2:17 a.m. every single night. When I answered, there would be nothing but breathing, slow, steady, like someone savoring the moment. I changed my number. The calls kept coming. Always 217, always breathing. I started keeping the lights on all night. My sleep schedule was wrecked. I'd pace the living room, peeking out the curtains, looking for his silhouette. Sometimes it was there, sometimes it wasn't. But even when it wasn't, I swore I could feel him watching. One Friday night, I stayed home instead of working, hoping to catch whoever was messing with me. Around 2 a.m., the phone rang again. I didn't pick up. Instead, I crept to the big front window, barely moving the curtain. He was standing in my yard, not on the porch, not on the sidewalk, in my yard. His head tilted slightly, his hands hanging loose at his sides. He wasn't moving, wasn't speaking, just standing there, looking straight at my window like he knew exactly where I was. I dropped the curtain and backed away, my chest tight. I called the police. They showed up 10 minutes later, but he was gone. They searched the yard and the street, found nothing. They told me to keep my doors locked and call back if it happened again. That night, I barely slept. The next morning, I went outside to check the yard. In the dirt just under my window, I found shoe prints, big ones, fresh, and next to them, a small envelope. Inside was a single Polaroid photo of me asleep in my bed. I threw up right there in the yard. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't afford to break my lease, and the police had nothing to go on. I started barricading my doors at night with chairs, kept my phone next to me at all times. My anxiety was constant. I'd walk from room to room, checking every window and closet. Sometimes, when I was sure the house was empty, I'd hear faint creaks above me, as though someone was in the attic. Then came the night I'll never forget. It was raining hard, wind rattling the old windows. I sat in the living room, lights off, trying to watch TV, but mostly listening for any sound. At exactly 2:17 a.m., my phone rang. This time, instead of breathing, I heard a whisper. I'm already inside. I dropped the phone. My whole body went cold. I grabbed the baseball bat I kept by the couch and crept through the house, checking every room, kitchen, bathroom, bedroom, nothing. Then I remembered the attic. The access panel was in the hallway, just a small square of wood. My hands shook as I reached for the pull string. It swung slightly, just enough to show that it had been disturbed recently. I stood there frozen, rain hammering against the house, the phone still ringing on the floor behind me. Suddenly, from above, a single slow footstep. I bolted out the door into the rain, barefoot, and ran to my car. I didn't stop until I was at the police station. This time, they took me seriously. They sent officers back to my house immediately. They found him. He was in the attic, crouched near the opening, but holding a small knife. The police told me he had a sleeping bag, food, even a small camera up there. He'd been living in my attic for weeks, coming down at night to watch me, sometimes standing in my yard just to scare me. His name wasn't even on the mailbox across the street. That house was vacant. He had been squatting there for months, pretending to be a neighbor while picking out his next victim. I moved out the next day. Even now, years later, I still wake up at 2:17 a.m. sometimes, heart pounding, sure that I'll hear breathing on the line if I pick up the phone. I don't open curtains at night anymore. I don't wave at strangers across the street. And I haven't lived alone since, because I know now that it wasn't just some weird man in an old house across from mine. It was someone who wanted to erase the line between neighbor and intruder, between my life and his. Someone who could be anywhere, watching, waiting, even when you think you're safe. Story the end. A cold wind rolled over the cracked pavement of Maplewood Street the day I moved into my new apartment. It was a 2-story duplex at the edge of a small Midwestern town in Illinois, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone and strangers stood out immediately. The rent was cheap and the building was old but solid. At least that's what the landlord told me. My unit faced a narrow alley, and directly across from my windows stood another duplex that looked far more rundown than mine. Its curtains were always drawn, its yard overgrown, and there was a faint smell of damp earth whenever the wind blew from that direction. I arrived in a beat-up U-Haul, exhausted from a cross-state move. As I hauled my last box inside, a man from the neighboring duplex leaned out his window and stared at me. His face was pale, thin, his eyes wide but sunken, like he hadn't slept in days. He didn't wave or smile. He just stared. When I raised a hand in an awkward greeting, he vanished behind the curtain. I'd been warned about this neighbor by the landlord in a vague, offhand way. He keeps to himself, she said. Strange guy, but harmless. I didn't think much of it. People are odd. But as the days passed, I began to feel a creeping sense of unease. Every time I stepped outside, whether it was morning or midnight, I caught glimpses of him watching me. Sometimes he was at his window, sometimes standing in his doorway, sometimes leaning against the fence that divided our yards. Always silent, always staring. It started small. The first week, I'd hear muffled thuds from his side of the building at odd hours. At first, I thought it was just moving furniture or dropping heavy objects. But the sounds were rhythmic, 3 slow bangs, then silence. Another night, a dragging sound, like someone pulling something heavy across a wooden floor. I would stand still, listening, and the sounds would stop as if he knew I was listening. One evening, as I was taking out the trash, I noticed something odd. In my small front yard near the fence, there was a pile of dead birds. Not many, just 3 or 4, but arranged in a neat little triangle. They hadn't been there earlier that day. I gagged at the smell and quickly tossed them into a bag, telling myself it was probably some stray cat or raccoon that had left them. But when I glanced at his window, I saw the curtain shift, and for the briefest second, his pale face stared back at me. By the second week, I couldn't sleep. Every night at around 2:30 a.m., I'd hear soft knocking on my walls, like someone tapping their fingers slowly, methodically. At first, I thought it was pipes or the old building settling, but then the tapping would move, one night on the wall behind my bed, another night on the ceiling, another on the floor near the kitchen. It was like he was mapping my movements, learning where I slept, where I stood. I finally confronted him one afternoon. I walked across the alley, knocked on his door. No answer. The windows were grimy, curtains drawn. But I could hear faint whispers inside, low and almost chant-like, though I couldn't make out the words. After a full minute, the whispers stopped. The air felt heavy, oppressive. I turned to leave, but as I did, I heard a soft, deliberate laugh behind the door. I didn't look back, I just walked quickly back to my side. That night, things escalated. I woke to the sound of my front door handle jiggling. Someone was trying to get in. Heart racing, I crept to the peephole. The porch light flickered, and there he was, my neighbor, standing motionless, his face inches from the door. He wasn't touching the handle anymore, just staring at the peephole as if he knew I was watching. I backed away slowly, grabbed my phone, and called 911. By the time the police arrived, he was gone. The officers checked his duplex. They came back and said, "There's no one there." I stared at them, incredulous. "What do you mean? He was just at my door." One of them shrugged. "The unit's empty. Looks like it hasn't been rented in months." My mouth went dry. "But I've seen him. He's been watching me for weeks." They exchanged a look, then left, telling me to call again if there were any more problems. I didn't sleep that night. At 3 a.m., I heard something in the kitchen. When I flicked on the light, there was a small figurine sitting on my table. It was hand-carved, crude but recognizable. A small wooden figure with a gaunt face, staring eyes, and hands pressed against its head. My hands shook as I picked it up. It smelled faintly of damp earth, like the smell from his yard. I threw it in the trash, locked every door and window, and sat up until dawn. Over the next few days, more figurines appeared. On my porch, on my windowsill, inside my mailbox. Each one was more detailed than the last until they started to look like me. My face, my posture, my clothes. I started noticing scratches on my windows at night, like fingernails dragging slowly across the glass. My lights flickered randomly, and my phone began receiving calls from an unlisted number. Just heavy breathing, sometimes faint whispers of my name. I tried staying with a friend across town for a few nights. The first night, nothing happened. The second night, I woke at 3:17 a.m. to find one of those figurines on the nightstand of my friend's guest room. It was me again, but this time, its wooden mouth was open wide, like it was screaming. I went back to my apartment, defeated. I thought maybe if I ignored it, it would stop. But the activity only intensified. The knocks grew louder. The dragging noises turned into footsteps pacing outside my door. The whispers became clearer, now saying full sentences in a low, raspy voice. "I see you. You can't leave. It's your turn." One night, I woke to a cold hand brushing my ankle. I bolted upright, grabbed the baseball bat I kept beside the bed, and turned on the light. Nothing was there. But my bedroom door was open, and muddy footprints led from the doorway to the foot of my bed, and then vanished. Neighbors began to avoid me. They stopped making eye contact, stopped waving. One older woman across the street whispered to me one afternoon, "Don't look at him. Don't let him know you're watching. That's how he stays." When I asked what she meant, she just shook her head and hurried away. Now, months later, I've given up trying to explain it. He's still there. I see him at the window across the alley, pale and still, watching me. I hear his footsteps circling my apartment at night. Figurines appear no matter where I go. The smell of damp earth follows me everywhere. I don't know if he's a man, a ghost, or something else entirely. All I know is that he's patient, and he's not going away. The neighbor who isn't supposed to exist is always there, just out of reach, waiting. And every night at 3:17 a.m., I wake up without knowing why and find my curtains parted as if someone was standing there watching me sleep. Story the end. A year after my divorce, I decided to start fresh and moved into a small, quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of Indianapolis. The houses there were modest, mostly built in the 60s and 70s, with big yards and plenty of trees. It was the kind of place where you'd imagine kids riding bikes in the street and neighbors chatting over fences. I wanted peace, and this seemed like the right place for it. My new home was a single-story ranch with pale blue siding and a porch that wrapped around the front. The first few weeks were uneventful. People waved when I drove by, and the street itself was always calm. But one house at the very end of the block caught my eye. It was smaller than the others, set back behind a large oak tree. The windows were always covered with dark curtains. The grass in the yard was too long, unkempt. I never saw anyone outside. The house belonged to a man named Jack. That's all I knew at first. A middle-aged man, maybe late 40s or early 50s, tall, gaunt, with a scruffy beard and sunken eyes. He would stand on his porch in the evenings, not smoking, not drinking, just standing, watching. The first time I noticed him, I thought maybe he was just shy. I waved politely. He didn't wave back. He just tilted his head slightly and turned to go inside. It didn't take long for strange things to start happening. I'd wake up in the middle of the night and hear noises outside my window, soft crunching sounds like footsteps on gravel. When I'd peek through the blinds, I'd see nothing but shadows. Sometimes I'd catch a glimpse of someone walking slowly past my house, but by the time I blinked, they were gone. One morning, I found a single Polaroid photograph taped to my mailbox. It was of my house. The picture had clearly been taken at night. My curtains were drawn, but the flash had illuminated the front of my home. I felt a chill run through me as I peeled the tape off. No note, no explanation, just the photo. I went to the local police station to report it, but the officer at the desk shrugged. "Could be a prank," he said. "Kids these days." But there were no kids in my neighborhood. Only retirees, young couples, and people like me trying to keep to themselves. The photos kept coming. First, my house from different angles. Then my car. Then me. The last one was a shot of me standing at my kitchen sink, washing dishes. The blinds had been open. That meant someone had been on my property right outside the window, taking the picture. My stomach dropped when I saw it. I started watching the street more carefully. Jack's house always had its curtains drawn. Sometimes, though, I'd see a faint glow of light from behind them, like a flickering candle or a television screen. I didn't see him on the porch anymore. Instead, I'd see a shadow move past the window or a door creak open slightly and then close. One evening around dusk, I was watering the small garden in my backyard when I felt eyes on me. I turned, and just beyond the fence line near the oak tree, there he was. Jack. He was standing completely still, his head slightly tilted, watching me. I shouted, "Can I help you?" But he didn't respond. He just stepped back into the shadows and disappeared. I installed cameras the next day. Motion sensors, floodlights, the whole package. But the footage was never clear. Sometimes there would be a flicker of movement, a blurry figure at the edge of the yard, but nothing distinct enough to prove anything. Once around 3 a.m., the alarm went off. When I checked the live feed on my phone, the camera showed a man standing at the corner of my backyard, just outside the fence. He was tall, thin, and wearing a hooded sweatshirt. By the time police arrived, he was gone. The next morning, a new Polaroid was taped to my front door. This one showed the inside of my living room, my couch, my coffee table, my TV. I felt sick. That meant whoever was doing this had been inside my house. I changed the locks. I installed a second deadbolt. I even nailed my windows shut. Still, things kept happening. My furniture would be slightly rearranged. Items I was sure I'd left in one place would be moved to another. My fridge door would be ajar in the morning. Sometimes the TV would be on when I woke up. Then came the notes. Written on lined paper, the handwriting cramped and uneven. The first one said, "You shouldn't close your blinds. It's rude." The second said, "Don't change the locks. I have the keys." The third one was just a drawing, my house with stick figures standing in every window. I barely slept anymore. My nights were spent sitting in the living room with a baseball bat, waiting. I called the police repeatedly, but without catching someone in the act, they couldn't help. My neighbors started avoiding me, probably thinking I was overreacting. But I knew. I knew it was Jack. One night, I heard a noise in my hallway around 2 a.m., a soft creak, like a floorboard under weight. I froze. The bat was already in my hands. My heart pounded so loud I thought it would wake the entire street. Slowly, I stood and moved toward the hallway. There, just at the edge of the light, was a figure. Tall, thin, still. I couldn't see his face, but I knew. "Get out!" I shouted, my voice breaking. The figure didn't move. I lunged forward with the bat, but by the time I swung, he was gone. The front door was slightly open, swaying in the night breeze. I called 911. The police came. They found nothing. But in my mailbox the next morning was a new Polaroid. This one of me standing in the hallway the night before, bat in hand. The picture had been taken from inside the house. I moved out within a week. I didn't care about breaking the lease. I packed everything I could fit into my car and left. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. For a while, things were quiet. I rented a small apartment in a different city under a different name. No one knew me. No one knew where I'd gone. But then one evening, when I came home from work, there was a Polaroid taped to my door. This one showed me walking into the building, groceries in hand. I don't know how he found me. I don't know how long he's been following me, but I know it's him. I see shadows sometimes across the street, a figure standing too still, watching too long, and every so often another Polaroid appears. I don't go to the police anymore. I don't tell friends. No one believes me. They think I'm paranoid. Maybe I am. But then I look at the photos, each one perfectly framed, each one showing me from angles no one else could have, and I know he's still out there, watching, watching, waiting, following, always just close enough for me to feel it, but never close enough for anyone else to see. And I know someday he'll stop taking pictures. Someday he'll step out from behind the camera. Story the end.